14. Hear now the word of the Lord. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come to you and say, "Give this person your place." And then, in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The word of the Lord. There's a story about a guy going to his high school reunion. He had done very well for himself in the business world, and he arrived at his 25th class reunion driving a brand new Mercedes. He wore an expensive tailored suit, gold cufflinks, and an expensive watch. When he walked into the banquet hall, he made sure everybody saw him. He went from table to table, dropping hints about his successes, telling about his vacation home, and bragging about his recent promotion. He wanted more than anything for his former classmates to admire him. But as the evening wore on, he began to notice that no one seemed to be listening to him. Conversations at other tables were full of laughter and warmth, but the chairs that were around him grew emptier and emptier. And by the end of the night, he found himself sitting pretty much alone, watching others connect, sharing old stories and making new joys. His classmates had not been impressed with his wealth. They were more impressed with people who showed kindness and humility, with people who remembered names, people who asked about families, and who listened with genuine interest. The story reminds us of the human temptation to want recognition, to want to have the best seat at the table, not just literally, but socially, professionally, and even spiritually. It's also a story about how quickly that pursuit can backfire when admiration becomes more important than relationship. In the passage today, Jesus attends a meal at the home of a prominent person. Around him, people are jostling for the best places to sit, angling for recognition, for honor, and for a kind of a social standing that says, "I am important." It's a scene that feels familiar even to this day, doesn't it? Even though this story is centuries removed from ours. Because isn't that the way of the world? I volunteer at the St. Augustine Amphitheater, and lots of shows have special VIP events. They'll tell us about the volunteers. Okay, well, tonight we got these VIP special things coming in, and they get a special entrance, and they get special seats, and they get to meet the artists. And of course, those packages cost a lot more. Just like in this Bible passage, we still have a culture of front row seats and VIP access. We still measure people by their status, by their accomplishments, by their wealth. or by their influence. And in our own quieter ways, maybe we too long for some admiration. We may not drive luxury cars to reunions, but we still want others to notice our achievements, to recognize our good deeds, to think well of us. And along with that desire for recognition comes another temptation, the temptation to be judgmental. If we can't have that seat of honor, at least we can size up the person who does. We can tell ourselves that the one sitting there doesn't really deserve to be there, or that we would be better in that place. Being judgmental and wanting admiration, really two sides of the same coin. They both come from the need to prove our worth at the expense of others. But getting back to the meal, what does Jesus do at the meal? He doesn't get into some competition. He doesn't accept the rules of the game where honor is measured by seat assignments. Instead, he tells those who are gathered a parable about choosing the lowest place, not the highest. He reminds them that true honor is not taken, it's given. And he reminds them that real hospitality is not about impressing the people who can repay us, but about welcoming those who cannot. What Jesus is doing here is turning the spotlight away from oneself. He's saying that life isn't about pushing others out of the way to get to the front of the line. It's not about comparing ourselves to others to see who's worthy and who's not. It's not about being admired or applauded. Instead, it's about humility. It's about serving without expecting to be served. It's about making room at the table for people who have nowhere else to go. That's a hard lesson for us, isn't it? Because we live in a world where self-promotion is expected. Social media thrives on people showcasing their best lives, their achievements, their talents, their lunch. Our workplaces reward those who push themselves forward. But admiration and judgment, those are slippery things. They may feel good for a moment, but they rarely satisfy us. Often, they create distance rather than closeness. They isolate rather than connect. They keep us from seeing others as they really are. They keep us from receiving the grace as we really are. Here's another story. Family was new in the community, started attending worship at a church. They're a bit different from most of the other members. Their clothes were plain, their car was old, and they didn't know the unspoken rules of that congregation. Some members of the church judged them quietly, thinking that they don't really seem to fit in. Others thought, well, they probably won't stay here long. But one elder from the church, an older woman who sat near the back each week, noticed them. And instead of judging them, she welcomed them. She invited them to the coffee hour. She introduced them to folks. She made sure they had a place at the table. Over time, they became very involved in the church. They brought a new energy. They had new talents and new friendships. And years later, when that elder passed away, it was a person from that family who spoke with tears about how much their kindness had meant to them. The others who had been judging them had long forgotten their doubts. But the one who chose humility the one who gave them a place, left a lasting mark on their lives. That's the difference between judgment and grace. That's the difference between seeking admiration and offering welcome. The Presbyterian theologian Karl Barth once said, "Grace is the decision God makes for us without our deserving." That's the heart of the gospel. God doesn't judge us by our seat at the table, by how impressive we look, or if others admire us. God sees us in our brokenness, our pride, our insecurity. Still, God welcomes us. God welcomes us like that. Aren't we called to welcome others with the same humility and generosity? Not because it makes us look good, not because we'll be admired, but because that is the way of Christ. What does that mean for us practically? It means resisting the urge to compare ourselves constantly with others, whether in success or appearance or influence. It means checking our judgmental thoughts that creep in when we see something different or when we envy someone's recognition. It means choosing humility, not false humility that wants to be noticed for being humble, but genuine humility that says, I don't have to be admired to know my worth. It means making room at our tables for those who might otherwise be left out. The world tells us, seek the best seats. Christ tells us, give them away. The world tells us to be admired and to admire those in power. And Christ tells us to serve, to be grateful. The world tells us to judge. Christ tells us to love. At the high school reunion I mentioned earlier, the man who wanted admiration left that banquet hall disappointed. But the people who had spent the night laughing and reconnecting left full of joy, full of gratitude, full of the bonds that come when people are more interested in one another than they are in themselves. Isn't that what we long for deep down? Not admiration, not status, not judgment, but belonging. Belonging that comes from humility, from grace, from knowing that at God's table there is room for everyone. May we live that vision. May we resist judgment. May we let go of the need for admiration. May we, with humility, welcome one another just as Christ welcomed us. In the name of the Father,